Hey fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. What's up, friends and patriots? Welcome back to another week at the 4th Box podcast. We are going to get into some interesting stuff tonight. We've kind of been in between guests. So we had a guest last week. We're off guest this week. We have another one coming next week. So bear with us. We're going to kind of get into something a little bit different from both the conversations. But it is something that we talked about before in various capacities. Pops doesn't quite know what we're getting into yet. I have kind of prepped the episode without him being involved, so it'll be a surprise for him, but I think we're going to be on a good track for this evening. But before we roll down that road, I will let you lead us in, as you normally do, Pops, with all of our normal intro stuff.
Okay, great. Greetings, listeners, fellow patriots. Welcome to the 4th Box podcast, coming to you as always from our virtual Buckman Tavern. It's the place that patriots gather, and we say that in honor of those great patriots who used to convene at the Buckman Tavern right on the long side of the Lexington Green up to and including the night before the shot heard around the world, April 19, 1775, as we're marching toward the celebration of our 250th anniversary. We certainly want to keep in mind those great events that led to the grand experiment that we call the United States of America. So welcome aboard, everybody. Tonight I am toasting, and I have a little Ardbeg Islay-style Scotch whiskey for my toast tonight, and I am toasting all of the veterans, of course, especially those who we lost in the various conflicts around the world. We're in the week of Memorial Day. Very fitting that we celebrate those brave men and women who have sacrificed so much. Whether these wars or not were just is a topic for another day. And a reminder, a veteran is someone who at one point in their life wrote a blank check payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their life. So anybody who has wore the uniform, we salute thee, and we thank you so much for your service, especially those that have been deployed around the world.
Yeah, hear, hear.
The quote tonight comes from a kind of a contemporary. We've been trying to find some more current voices to weigh in on those things that we always push here, personal liberty. So this is a great one. The most important kind of freedom is to be what you really are. You trade in your reality for a role. You trade in your sense for an act. You give up your ability to feel, and in exchange, put on a mask. There can't be any large-scale revolution until there's a personal revolution on an individual level. It's got to happen inside first. And that comes from none other than the great Jimmy Morrison of the Doors. I thought that was a great one. It really has to happen inside all of us first. If we're going to turn things around, we ourselves have to be committed to no longer wearing a mask and stepping out for who we really are.
Yeah, that's a hard-hitting quote, and it strays a lot from the types of quotes that we normally have on here. It's actually a really different voice on a really different subject, but That is so important. So much of the problems that we have today are because people don't know how to be themselves or are afraid to be themselves. And if they at least know who they are afraid to speak truly about that. We have kind of lost authenticity on a mass scale. The individual has lost authenticity, which is critically important in maintaining a country like this. That was a big part of what our founding fathers had. They were authentic. They knew who they were. They knew what they wanted to be, and they were very grounded in that. And we don't have that today. And I think that problem, when we look at it on like the micro scale of just the individual, we can see how it really expands and multiplies in mass and has a really negative impact on society as a whole. So that's a really interesting quote to share.
Yeah, I thought it was, and remember that's at least 50 years old, but he had the foresight and the vision to see that this was a stumbling block for society. And I think we touched on it a couple of weeks ago when you mentioned the TikTokers and everybody wanted to be in conformance with everybody else and just be marching lockstep. And in this particular quote, Jimmy is pointing out the importance of staying true to yourself. The only way we can encourage the community and the country to stay true is if we, in fact, are true to ourselves. So I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a great quote, and it ties in nicely with some of the things we've talked about over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. Did you have a moment in history this week?
I do have a moment in history. This actually comes from June the 7th, which is about a week out from where we are tonight. Richard Henry Lee proposes on June the 7th what is known as the Lee Resolution to the Continental Congress, pushing for independence from Great Britain. So you might recall last week we talked about the Virginia Convention. Now there's momentum building toward that very important day in our history, July 4th, signing a Declaration of Independence. So you can see that there are more voices, very strategic voices throughout the colonies that are starting to push. It's gathering momentum. And this was Richard Henry Lee proposes the Lee Resolution. So that happened on June the 7th, 1776. And as a lead up to the Declaration of Independence, our 4th of July celebration. So that's our moment in history from 250 years ago, give or take, back in those revolutionary times.
Yeah. Looking back on that timeline, we can see how we're getting a lot closer to what is to come and what we ultimately will end up celebrating here in about a month and a half. So kind of exciting stuff. And like I said, when we started this little series, and like we remind you guys every week, it is really important for us to look back on this because it's very easy to remember the 4th of July and go, hooray, it's, hamburger hot dog day. But it's very difficult to remember the courage and the bravery that it took to get to this moment in time, which was an instrumental moment for liberty as a whole. The idea of liberty around the world. Like, this is something that changed all of human history, the creation, the inception of the United States of America. It's not just something that gave us this holiday here in this country today. It's something that changed what the word meant globally. So super important to look back on, the people that were involved in this enormous experiment and what it took to get there.
Yeah, great observation. I think, the last time we talked with Jared and Mike out in South Dakota, I think we finished with the Sam Adams quote about not requiring a majority, but any number of people that are committed to setting brush fires in people's mind. And this, to me, looks like that's what's happening. You have these voices that are popping up and they're building momentum. And that is what we need in this country today. We need strong voices standing up for individual liberty and build that momentum like it did back 250 years ago. There's voices standing up and people are starting to coalesce around these messages which is exactly what we need today. We need strong voices from statesmen, not politicians, from statesmen that are committed to protecting and preserving personal liberty for all of us. And as these voices pop up, all of us will find ourselves migrating and building strength to those voices that are espousing that message. It's all about personal liberty, folks. The sacrifices that they made 250 years ago, they risked everything. They risked their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor, and many of them lost everything but their honor. And if we're going to win it back, this is what we have to be committed to.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great comparison to draw, because when we look back at these moments through history, they didn't know where it was going when these people started jumping on this train of standing for this thing. They knew what they were standing for. They knew they needed change. And as each individual person or group started to stand, they didn't know that it would culminate in this. Ultimately, there were all these people spread through the colonies with not the technology we had today to stay in touch with each other, to be, rapid firing off messages and updates. These were just people who were individually, either as truly an individual or as a small group in their community, getting up and voicing their concern without seeing the big picture from the beginning. It started to grow. It started to become clear that this was going to be a full, break off away from Britain into our own country here. But that wasn't necessarily the first idea that people had as they started standing for their own freedoms. And so when you think of it that way, and you think of what we're doing here today, you and I sitting in this podcast, other people sitting in small podcasts, other like-minded people in big podcasts, big groups, small groups, we think about all these different groups spread out across the country. We don't know where it's heading either. But there are a lot of us with similar mindsets to what those people had 250 years ago. So when I think about it, in that way, it does put me back on that optimistic train of thinking, okay, maybe there's a shot. I don't necessarily know if the conversation tonight is going to feel optimistic, but when I think about what they were going through then and what we're going through now, there's hope. There is hope.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, because it really does come full circle and tie back into the quote tonight, and that's staying true to yourself and not being necessarily caught up in the fashions of today, the cool things of today, but standing up for what made this country a dominant force in the world, economically, financially, socially, spiritually, all of those things. And that was the idea that we are all created equal and we all have an opportunity to live the life as we see fit. That's the whole thing. Instead of all crowding into a caste, a mold, we have the opportunity. That is what they were standing for. None of us have to be a duplicate replica of the next one. We have the opportunity to live as we see fit. That is worth fighting for. That's what generations before us, speaking of honoring Memorial Day and all those that have gone on before, that is what we were fighting for. That is what we were trying to defend, the idea of not everybody fitting into a single mold. We all have an opportunity to live as we see fit. And that is something that all of us should be desperately trying to maintain and to bring back.
Yeah, it's so necessary. So all that said, let's get into the main topic for tonight, which is basically the systemic land grab happening as a sort of means to an end for Agenda 2030. I basically compiled a bunch of examples because these are things that we've talked about a lot in, here or there conversations, but I am glad that you referenced Jared and Mike a few minutes ago and what they have gone through in South Dakota, because it is a big part of this conversation. We've had a lot of discussions about the carbon sequestering pipeline projects specifically, and we've talked about data centers to some degree, and we've talked about the solar panel stuff, but we haven't necessarily outlined it all as hey, this is how big of a problem this is. And so that's what I wanted to do tonight. I didn't list every single state because that would be like ridiculous and we'd be here all night. So I just went through and I tried to pick some states from every region of the country, right? So like Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, kind of central. I just tried to pick a few states from each region. And I also want to be clear when I say that I divvied this up into different categories of land grabs that are happening. For example, carbon sequestration would be one, right? Solar farm or energy infrastructure would be one. And I put states into some of those categories, but it doesn't mean it's the only thing happening there. And like Pennsylvania, I did list multiple times because, of course, you're in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of listeners in Pennsylvania. So I did list that under a few categories. Most of the states in the country will fall into more than one category when it comes down to it. We're not going to go through all that tonight because that, like I said, we don't have the time. But I want to be clear when I say that this is stuff that is going on everywhere. And as we start to put those pieces of the puzzle together and start to kind of build this map, it will allow us to see that there is a grander plan here. There's something bigger happening. So the very first one I'm going to start with here is the category of solar farms or energy infrastructure. The first state that I'm going to bring up is New York, and that's because they have been dealing with a lot of pushback from their citizens, small farmers, ranchers, etc., who are upset about this because it is taking so much farmland. Similarly to what we saw in South Dakota and parts of the Midwest, this is a situation where private companies are coming in and using eminent domain, and they're doing it because they're saying that it's for public use. So that's what we're seeing kind of all over the country here, and New York is just one example. Basically, right now, there are 18 major sites that are advancing across the state of New York. And again, this is predominantly chewing up good, usable farmland, and much of it is private land. So we already know that conversation. We already know what's involved with that because Jared and Mike went through it. You really have to fight a lot of weird legislation to be able to prove that it already is being used for public use. It's in the hands of a private citizen, and they are using it for the public good, public betterment, especially when we think about all these people who are rah for climate change. It's very hard to understand how they can play both sides of that. Like, hey, we need solar panels, but also we need to destroy a farm, a perfectly good plot of land. How they can play both, I don't know. That's not really for us to speculate. I'm just bringing this one to the table. Right now in the state of New York, there's 18 sites that are advancing with pretty large-scale solar panel infrastructure. I'm going to get through the other states in this category before I pass it over to you. How's that sound?
Sure.
All right, cool. So the next one I wanted to bring up is Texas. Again, when I bring up some of these states, know that there are a lot of other projects going on. I'm just sharing a couple examples. So Texas, I believe it's about 800 acres. They have development starting for a solar panel farm that's basically owned by Meta. So that's the company that owns Facebook and Instagram. And again, this is a situation where we can see how the big tech companies are really coming in and chewing up a lot of valuable, usable land that could be used for other resources. And not only are they using that land that could be used for other resources, but they're taking the resources off the land and it's being used for their purposes. So this is a big tech situation where Meta's coming in and buying up 800 acres. Another one I wanted to bring up here is Ohio. Ohio has a 6,000 acre solar panel farm. It's known as the Oak Run Solar Panel Farm. I wanted to bring this one up because this one has been kind of being bounced back and forth. It's a big plot of land that's owned by Bill Gates. It's interesting because this one was actually overturned just yesterday as the day we're recording this. So on May 26th, they basically put a hold on this. It's not that it's not happening anymore. It's basically just on pause, which is what happens oftentimes when these things kind of come to a standstill. It's not dead. It doesn't mean it's not progressing any further. It just means it's on pause until somebody finds the right verbiage to push it through again. Last one that I'm going to share in the solar farms category is Pennsylvania. Because, of course, like I said, you're in Pennsylvania, a lot of our listeners in Pennsylvania, so it's an important one. There are about 60 solar farm projects statewide, with a 2,700 acre project under construction around Clearfield. Interesting thing about some of these solar farm projects that are in PA is the power generated is actually being sent straight to New York. So Pennsylvania taxpayers are funding it, but they're not reaping any of the benefits. You can't even sell them on the idea that the benefits are actually going to come directly back to them. Yeah, you're going to get a lower energy bill, this and that. No, you're not, because the energy is going straight to another state, which brings us back to the first point. The state of New York is in the process of adding a ton of this infrastructure to their own state. So why are they pulling from a neighboring state? It's all very confusing, but the underlying issue here is that big plots of land, kind of a mix of public and private, are being used for this purpose around the country.
Yeah, it's just further evidence to me of the successful propagandizing that has gone on with the American electorate. First of all, solar farms are marginal at best as to whether or not they are even effective and efficient. They've shut some of the biggest solar farms down because they were a drain on the power grid. So the idea, I think this just goes back to so many things that we've talked about from the beginning. The failure to stay within constitutional bounds, the theft of personal property for private gain, private company gain under the guise of some arm twisting by the government. We're going to force feed you green energy. And of course, you have the folks in the cities that have largely no feeling about the loss of the neighborhood farm. They have no connection. They think chicken nuggets come out of a box, right? So they do not understand largely the value of farms and of the farmland. It's, the same thing could be said about these AI data centers popping up all over the place. They're consuming large swaths of land, and it's for more spying on us. But we have the significant population centers around the country that are cheerleading for this stuff. So there is political favor because they have the large population centers. Oh, we're saving the world. We got solar farms. Meanwhile, you don't have anything to eat, or your food has dramatically inflated in cost because you have just reduced the food producing acreage out there. The ability for the government to convince the sheeple that this sort of thing is good for them is so staggering to me. But when you look at what is coming off of mainstream news outlets, this is how we're going to save ourselves. This is how we're going to save the planet. We're going to put in wind farms and we're going to put in solar farms and we're going to destroy all this farmland that is producing food to feed the country and the world. It is just absolute nonsense. But to your bigger point, the 2030 agenda, this is all marching us to that 15-minute city. You will eat bugs and you will like it. And folks, you need to wake up and take a look at what they have promised. And they are serious. This isn't hyperbole. This is their intent. They've been very open about it. Only we can change it. But we can't change it if we're sitting at home cheering for what they're feeding you on the TV set. You got to open up your eyes, employ a little critical thinking, and see what is happening. We are losing our food producing acreage. We are employing energy techniques that have proven not to work. But we have a big fan club cheering for it. It's pathetic.
Yeah, the solar farm one is really hard to get by for the point that you made in the beginning, and that is that so many of them are closing because they're not viable. So, to me, when I hear that this amount of land is being used across the country still for something that we know doesn't work, then it's not about what's going on the land. It has nothing to do with solar panels. It just has to do with the land being taken from the use that it's currently employed as, which in most of these cases, as discussed, is farmland and, food production at the local level. So that's where this ties to Agenda 2030. And that's why this is not theoretical, because the thing that they're putting on the land doesn't work, and they're the ones who tell us that it doesn't work. So if they're the ones who are telling us it doesn't work, but they're putting those things on the land, then their purpose, their agenda is different than what they're telling us that it is. And to your point, the Agenda 2030 thing is a very real thing. And it is the middle of 2026. We're not that far away from the targets that many of the countries around the world have promised to hit, us being one of them, which is why we see so much going on here in the way of solar panels, solar panel farms taking up so much land, as well as the other things that we're going to get into here. And the next one is data center infrastructure, and infrastructure that might be related to data centers. So where they're pulling their water from, where they're pulling the electricity from, if that's not already built into the landmass that's being used for the data center, then that's extra additional acreage that's not being considered, with the amounts that we're going to list here. So, and I don't even have the exact acreage amounts, I don't think, on a lot of these that I listed, but they're very easy to research on your own once I explain them, and I can share some of these things in the show notes. So we have talked about data centers a lot, in that this is a threat to us as citizens, because it means there's data worth collecting for a lot of people, big tech and big government, right? And we can say that these are more like surveillance centers, sure, but without assuming all of that, let's just look at the land usage, right? The amount of land being used in truly every single state for data centers right now is absolutely absurd. I've never seen anything like it. So again, I'm just listing a few. It's everywhere. If it's not near you, look a couple counties out, because I guarantee you will find it. So first state here, I will start with Pennsylvania again, of course. There are over 50 data center site proposals right now statewide. That does not include those that have already begun, and those that might already be in place. I found a really, really great resource, which I absolutely will put in the show notes here. It is trackdatacenters.com. It's a full map of the whole country. You can look at each individual state and find all of the ongoing construction sites, all of the proposed sites, everything. It's very useful, and it's very eye-opening when you see it all in one place. So Pennsylvania is a big state, right? But it's not that big. 50 right now are, potentially about to start construction, with various amounts of land and acreage being used here. So one thing that I thought was particularly interesting about the data center site proposals in PA, there was a $15 billion project just approved in Middlesex County. And when you look into these things, what you realize is that there are very big groups. This one's called the Pennsylvania Data Center Partners, and then Powerhouse Data Centers, that basically their full-time deal is to just push for data centers. So what their motive is, who's behind that, we won't even speculate. We'll just say that between these two groups, they're investing $15 billion in just one site. And there's 50 sites going up around the state. So this is not small change that is being put into this. And this is one state. So think about the amount of money that we're spending with the construction of these data centers. And then think about the amount of land that we must be taking up with that amount of money. Is there going to be any land left?
So it's really significant when you think about Pennsylvania. There's 67 counties, and we're talking about 50 data centers. Pennsylvania, believe it or not, folks, is largely an agricultural state. Lots and lots of agriculture in the state of Pennsylvania. Obviously, these things are not going up in the metropolitan areas. So where are they going up? It doesn't take a whole lot of critical thinking capability to see where this ends up. If you're putting data centers in the farmland, you have less food production. You have food shortage potential, but you have lots and lots of data centers. And this is what we're cheering for all you out there who are just solidly behind the idea of data centers all over this country. We are losing the important infrastructure for our own food production, let alone what we do for the rest of the world, for data centers. 50 data centers, 67 counties. That means 2/3 of the counties in this state are going to have a data center, and there are certain counties that there is not room available. So guess where it's going to be? It's going to be out here in the country, out here in the farmland. And to me, talking about what we've talked about many times, the globalist agenda, depopulation, this to me lines up perfectly with those goals by decreasing food producing areas, the acreage of food producing areas, and putting up data centers so that they can better watch over those of us that are left. We got to wake up, folks. The walls are closing in all around us.
Yep. Yeah, it's exactly right. And I don't know how many of these sites are private land. So eminent domain will be a discussion here too, almost certainly, because this is not a situation where when you have this much land covered, it's all public land. Pennsylvania isn't exactly known for, its large amount of public land. So eminent domain is almost certainly coming into play here too. And again, we have to ask ourselves how that falls into the category of true eminent domain and true public use. It's not for the benefit of the public. And I really just don't think it can be argued that it is. So moving on to Georgia, this is a situation where, like I was saying, the data centers are not the only relevant part of this conversation. There are also electrical companies in Georgia that will be kind of offset, but also used for production of energy for the data centers. And they are also, as private companies, using eminent domain to take over big areas of land throughout Georgia. So we have kind of two different categories, two different industries, I guess, but they're adjacent to each other, right? Using eminent domain to take over private land in Georgia. We have in the state of New Hampshire many data centers being proposed. This is something that you and I talked about offset a couple weeks back. It's interesting to me being up here in New Hampshire, seeing the Libertarian Party really attach themselves to the idea that we need data centers here to be ahead, I guess, of other states and countries. It just doesn't feel like a good argument. And I wonder what we had to do to get into the minds of libertarians of all people when we know that these data centers are going to come after private land. We're seeing it happen in the other states that we've listed so far, and we're seeing it happen around the country. They need to take private land to put in most of these things because, to your point, most of them need to go somewhere fairly rural, and that typically is owned by people. And a lot of the times it is farmland. So I just don't know how we got to that point where libertarians are like, yes, take the private land. That just feels like the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. But before I sidebar too much, let's just move on to the next state, which is West Virginia. This is an interesting one. I wanted to bring this up because there was just an interesting comment made here. So there is a $4 billion data center that was recently approved, privately funded by a DC-based real estate firm, which already I'm kind of confused by that. But what's weird here is that the governor, Patrick Morrisey, stated that moving forward, he wants to refer to what are typically known as data centers as intelligence centers instead. Because, and I quote, "That's what this is all about, to share intelligence, and we should all be supportive of that." Okay, so I hate that. This is very suspect. Sure, call it public use because we're sharing intelligence. But when I hear the word intelligence, I don't think about us being able to ask questions to AI. I think about central intelligence. I think about the United States government spying on its citizens. So he didn't come right out and say that, but I think he kind of did say it without saying it. So, kind of a weird one. Anything you want to touch on with that?
Yeah, I think it's just more evidence of what was learned during COVID and other things, where all they have to do is suggest that it's something for the public good, and there's going to be such a large percentage of the population stand up and cheer for it without even really thinking about the ramifications of something like this, because we have been so brainwashed and out of touch with what is really going on. So we're going to gobble up farmland and we're going to put in solar farms and wind farms and data centers, but it's all for your benefit, and people buy into this garbage. While your neighborhood farms and that feed this country, feed your district, are being gobbled up by something that is only there to control you. And we allow the message being delivered to convince us that this is great for us. I don't know how we get out of it, Bree. It just seems like we're on this never-ending loop where all they have to do is feed something out that sounds wonderful. So we'll call it intelligence centers. That sounds wonderful. We're all going to become much more intelligent. And somehow, some way, they get the political energy behind them because people think they're going to get something out of it. What you're going to get out of it is further enslavement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, again, with all of these conversations, with the situation in each individual state, we could have a full conversation about it. But as a reminder, look at so far the different states that we've touched on, the amount of land that we're already using for these other purposes, for purposes of the government, not of the people, which is not how this is supposed to work at all. But let's kind of keep moving through the list here. So Virginia is another one. Virginia already, interestingly enough, has one of the highest concentrations of data centers in the world. Right now, there are more data centers being proposed, of course, on generational farmland, but also right alongside cemeteries and very near Civil War battlefields and protected historic sites that would be within eyeshot, neighboring land. So, okay, yeah, we know that farmland is being chewed up across the country, but even this, nothing is sacred. Nothing. When it comes to this stuff, because the amount of money, think about the amount of money we've already discussed, right? Just about one location, $15 billion for one location in Pennsylvania out of 50 locations, out of 50 states. We're talking about so much money that, of course, nothing is sacred to these people. Let's move on. Montana. Montana, I just had some interesting numbers with this one, so it's not a huge amount comparatively, but you'll see why I'm kind of comparing it to what will be the last on the list for this one. So with Montana, we have Quantica Infrastructures planning a high-performance computing campus, which would require a continuous supply of up to 1 gigawatt of power, which is more than the average load of Northwestern Energy uses to serve it's 400,000 plus electricity customers. So Northwestern Energy is the main electricity company in that part of the state. They have over 400,000 customers. And this one data center will require a continuous supply of what it takes to supply 400,000 people.
Yep.
That's so crazy. And we're not even talking about the fresh water usage, especially in states that should be concerned about their water, because we hear all the time about all the droughts going on out west. Yet the water that is left is apparently going to be funneled in to these data centers, just like the electricity. And then we, the citizens, are supposed to believe that our energy bills aren't going to go up.
Right.
Well, then who's going to pay for it?
Right.
I don't know how this is going to be free.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think for 20 or 25 years now, we've been hearing that the electrical grid in this country is suspect and at risk anytime when there's peak loads because of heat and other things. And now we're going to double the electric consumption in areas even as remote and rural as up in Montana, but you're going to double it. And somehow these people are being convinced that their power is going to go down. And the water consumption that's used to cool these things is going to be less, and somehow all of their costs are going to go down. This is complete insanity that we are cheering for these things popping up all over the country while it's driving up energy costs. And guess what? They'll be shutting your home down before they shut that data center down. When it comes right down to power having to be distributed because there isn't enough to go around, guess who the hell is going to get cut out? We should not be standing here cheering for it. We should absolutely be refusing to allow this to happen. It doesn't matter whether it's supported by the federal government or whether it's supported by your state government. There is no constitutional authority to be appropriating land that the people have not been in line with. So we, the people, as always, got to be the ones that are waking up to what is happening around us. And I continue to harp on the notion, depopulation, they want all this energy to supply the needs of the elites, and the rest that are left here after all the food producing acreage is gobbled up and all the rest of it, the few that are left are going to be the minions for the elites that are living with all of the power they could possibly consume for all of their fancy lifestyles or whatever it is, because this is just not conducive to an expanding population. This stuff isn't going on in places around the world where populations are expanding. You cannot support it. We don't have the electrical infrastructure for this stuff to be supported. It is absolute insanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. And that brings me to the last one, which there's been a lot of talk about this one. So it's very important that it be brought up. The county commission in Box Elder County, Utah, just passed or just approved the 40,000 acre data center campus that is headed by Kevin O'Leary, who is one of the infamous sharks on Shark Tank. So very, very wealthy guy. And I think this one's interesting for two reasons. One, a lot of times we don't necessarily know the faces behind these things that are going on. So this one's interesting because we have someone who's already kind of a well-known figure. So it puts a face to the name, and it kind of makes it feel more real and more tangible, I think, because of that. But two, the size of it, 40,000 acres. Most people cannot fathom that amount of land because you've never seen that amount of untouched land, of land to be used. That is so much land. Think about the resources there. Now let's go back to what I just mentioned about Montana. That 1 gigawatt of power, if you remember, is the same as what 400,000 customers use. The Box Elder County data center would require 9 gigawatts of power. Where is this coming from? Wait, I'm sorry. That doesn't exist, I don't think. Like, what are we doing? This is all such bullshit that it's truly hard to wrap our head around. And then there's so many components of just this one thing that we can break down and get angry about. Like, first of all, that's crazy when we think about the electricity alone. We think about the water. Then we think about 40,000 acres of beautiful country in Utah being bought up by a billionaire and turned into a massive data center complex. Now, there's one more important part of this story that I want to add because it plays into something I'm going to touch on in a little bit. Right now, Kevin O'Leary is stating that there is a massive bot-driven push behind his opponents because, for good reason, people are pretty pissed about this. And the people of Box Elder County are fighting this. They're doing everything they can to stop this from happening. Many people in Utah outside of the county are taking this very seriously, are standing up against it. People around the country are very rightfully pissed about this one. We should be pissed about all of them. This one's a little bit more in your face for those two reasons that I mentioned earlier. But what's interesting is that Kevin O'Leary has the audacity to say that the criticism is coming from bots, not real people. Real people wouldn't be upset about this. That is how out of touch the people at the top are and how little they care about what happens to the rest of us.
Well, not only that, Bree, I think it's psychologically positioning people. So those that are out there that are voicing their opposition are now going to think, well, I'm really the only one bitching. The rest are just fake bots, right? I think it's conditioning. I think part of that is conditioning. But here's my real underlying question to all of this. 40,000 acres. So think about this, folks. I turn on my computer, I ask a question, I get an answer. I need to communicate with somebody around the country or around town. That capability is here. We can record this podcast. We can upload. We can download. What is there that we need thousands and hundreds of thousands of acres around the country, pristine land, beautiful land, parkland, farmland, forest land, all of this beautiful. What is there more that we can get out of these computers that we need this kind of data collection, storage, and transfer, buildings and complexes? 40,000 acres? You ought to be able to put every single computer and every single thing stored in a computer in one location that size, and we have them going on all over the country. What is in these places?
Yeah. There's just no way that we can be tricked into thinking it's for us.
Precisely.
It couldn't be for us, to your point. We're not asking for more of these things. Right. So, right. What?
Yeah. What is it for? What does it accomplish? How does it feed the nation, feed the country, promote peace? I don't get it. I do not get it. And we're falling, well, thankfully, like places in Utah and places in South Dakota, there are some people that are standing up. But we got to all stand up and say, this is not coming here. Absolutely not. We, the people, rule. Take your stuff and go home because it ain't happening here. That's what has to happen.
Yeah, it really does, because as we list through these states, we go through these states and we go through these various reasons for scooping up the land, taking the land from the people, we start to realize how much of the land is disappearing. Land that belongs to us. Public land, that's ours. And private land. We know that belongs to private citizens, and it's being taken all over the country. This is concerning. Whatever you think about why, I don't care. I don't care if you think it's nefarious or not. The point remains, the land is being taken, and it is not for you. So, Let's move on to the next category, which is forest management. This is a very short one, but another thing that's being talked about a lot out west. So there's a big program going on that mainly is happening in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. It's being talked about most in California, specifically in the Lake Tahoe region. That's where it seems there's the most pushback because of the glyphosate spraying going on. So enormous amounts of Roundup are being dumped on forests. This is for a myriad of reasons. Many of the areas that this is happening they're areas that were, recently burnt down, affected by wildfires. But they're also areas that timber is being harvested from. Now, this part is very important because when we think about glyphosate being sprayed on enormous chunks of land, this doesn't mean it's not quite the same as the other ones because the land isn't necessarily being taken, but it's kind of becoming unusable. It's no longer safe. Think about what people have to wear when they're dumping glyphosate on their fields in the Midwest. It's very dangerous. Now, that's a whole separate conversation. Glyphosate is very, very toxic. It's very cancerous. It's what causes a lot of the health issues we have in this country. Let's set all of that aside and recognize that people's homes, their yards, are affected by this, and they did not ask for it. They did not pick it. They did not okay it. They did not approve it. It's happening. Too bad. So sad for you. It's now in your waterways. It's in your backyards, and there's nothing you can do about it. So they might not be outright taking your land, but they're affecting the land that you live on without your approval. The other thing to consider with this one, and it kind of ties back into the last one, the data center things. When Trump first got into office this last time, there were a lot of executive orders that came out, which we talked about. Some of them seemed like, okay, that could be good. Some of them not great. Point is, that's not really the way you want to go about signing things into law. But as we go through this list, we start to see how some of those executive orders are now turning into this land grab problem. We know that there was an executive order about accelerating data center infrastructure, but another big one was there was an executive order about expanding America's timber harvesting. So this gives justification to the glyphosate dumping on much of the West under the guise of harvesting more American timber. That is deeply concerning to me because of the long-term implications that it has for the health of the public in that area, but also the land. We know what happens when you spray glyphosate on farmland. We don't know what happens when you dump it all over the mountain, pristine wilderness, alpine environments. What's going to come of that?
Yeah, again, I Bree, so many of these topics, I just can't keep myself from going back to global depopulation. You're polluting the waterways. Ultimately, these forest lands are feeding water systems that are ending up feeding metropolitan areas, and you're putting these forever chemicals and all the rest of this crap out there known to cause cancer and the rest of it. And we're sitting by like a herd of sheep. That we get what we tolerate. This is picks and torches behavior that they are putting on us. And we are plodding along with our head in the TV set while they're dumping poison on the mountain up behind you that feeds your water system. Again, I don't know where to go with this other than, we've cried from the mountaintops for decades that people got to wake up, because the people that are in position to be making decisions that should be benefiting you and your family and the future of this country are doing the exact opposite. And if you believe otherwise, you still have the blinders on when you see stuff like this going on, where food producing acreage are being stolen away, where pristine lands are being dumped with poisons that are feeding into the water system, that are the water for the population of this country, and we're sitting down like a herd of sheep. It's unbelievable. that we are sitting back allowing this stuff to happen. And pretty soon they'll be rolling out another scamdemic of some sort, and everybody will run out and get their next nocebo shot. I don't know, Bree, I don't know how we get beyond this until there is a large event where there is mass depopulation, and the ones that are left saying, oh, I think this was done intentionally. Because up until that point, the voices like yours and mine and others that are proclaiming these things are simply brushed aside and viewed as fringe or what have you. But folks just don't want to believe that things are going on in this country that are to your detriment and to the detriment of your children, and it is not going to change until you get up off the couch.
Yes, it's very difficult when you don't see it immediately affecting you. But as we're going through this list, what you should realize is that it is going to affect you. It is in every single state. They are taking your resources away. It may not have happened in your town. That does not mean it is not happening around you. Eventually, it will happen in every single town in America. There won't be a place to run. There won't be a mass wake up because it will trickle through the population so slowly that there won't be anything anybody can do about it. But that's why I wanted to talk about this tonight, because my hope is that as we combine these conversations into one, we can see how the entire map is already affected, how all of these different problems are kind of overlaying with each other and covering all of the land that's left. Which, again, Agenda 2030. Will there be any land by the year 2030? It seems like not. And that would be great for those who agreed to Agenda 2030, but I didn't. And you didn't. And everyone whose land is being taken didn't. This is not something we signed on for, but it's our shit that's being taken.
Well, and the important thing also, Bree, you mentioned the populated metropolitan areas of the Northeast. You mentioned the Deep South in Georgia. You mentioned the Far West. We know that it's going on in the middle of the country with South Dakota and down through the plain states with their land grab. It's going on all over, to your point. Every single area of this country is being affected by these things, that they're either stealing your land or they're poisoning your land and your waterways. And we are sitting back, allowing ourselves to be herded what appears to me like it's being set up for into the 15-minute cities. We're much easier to control when you're all bunched up in one area without the food producing areas now being any more. What are we going to sustain society with? We cannot eat what's coming out of a data center, folks. You can't eat anything out of there. The water that's coming out of there, you probably can't consume either. So we better start thinking about some of these things, because it is not, as you mentioned, for the best interest of us. It is not.
Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of got to where I was going to go with all this. But before we get to the very end, there are a couple more I want to hit on. I'll try to go quick. I know we're running short on time already. But this next one is very similar to the last one. That is atmospheric manipulation. So again, we've talked about the idea of cloud seeding and geoengineering to some extent. We haven't gone into it in too great of depths, but it is a real thing, especially in the West. This is mainly going on in the West because of those reasons we talked about earlier. So this is really crazy when you think about it. They need to use cloud seeding technology for water because they're so short on water, but those same states are putting in, data centers that are tens of thousands of acres large. So riddle me that. I guess we're just going to keep cloud seeding and manipulating the weather to make sure there's enough water for the data center. Okay, great. Sounds good. The reason that I added this one in is because similar to the last one, is because though no land is being taken with this, it's the exact same thing. you are being affected by something you did not agree to. You never consented to this. This is a change in the weather, which we don't know what can happen. We've seen things that have gone terribly, terribly wrong. Whether or not some of those things were caused by cloud seeding, example, the floods in Texas, we're not even going to get into that right now. We've already had those conversations. The point is, it's not our place to manipulate the amount of precipitation falling from the sky because we don't know the long-term effects of that. So all of these states, Wyoming, Colorado, Texas, Nevada's a big one. Nevada has a huge state-funded program that is actively expanding with cloud seeding. Again, we're not taking your land here. We're just manipulating it against your consent, your control. You have no ability to change or impact that or affect it at all. It's just going to happen to you. So I have a hard time with this one because I think people just don't necessarily know that it could harm them and they don't care to look into it. So because your land isn't obviously being stolen in front of you, you stay quiet. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel the effects of this. We don't have to go too far down the weeds with that one. I've got two more I want to touch on. The one, of course, is one that we talk about time and time again. I just wanted to bring it up. You already said it, the carbon pipeline thing. It's important to add in here because of the amount of land that it does cover. So South Dakota, North Dakota, Missouri, these are states that are on pause, thanks to people like Jared and Mike. If you remember from those conversations with them, the terminus from that pipeline originally was meant to be in North Dakota. Well, right now they had to change the plans entirely because of those states backing out. Currently, the terminus is meant to be in Wyoming because Iowa, Nebraska, and Wyoming are still very much victim to this. They have had a ton of people affected by eminent domain because of Summit Carbon Solutions. That's also not the only major carbon pipeline. It's the one that we have the most familiarity with. It's not the only one affecting the Midwest. But an interesting thing to note with this category is that Summit Carbon Solutions specifically has actually shifted its pipeline's purpose from carbon sequestration to enhanced oil recovery. They've had to change their entire mission statement because of people like Jared and Mike. So, first of all, amazing. That's awesome. Like, the fact that they had to do that with the amount of money they've dumped into this idea of carbon sequestration is a huge win for us, but it's not enough to get us there because there are still so many states being affected by this. And the last one that I really want to touch on is going to be critical minerals. But before I do that, anything you wanted to add with any of those things?
No, I think you're doing a good job covering what should be 4 or 5 very significant activities that are going on, supported by the government or completely funded by the government, that are stealing land, manipulating weather, adversely affecting water supplies. These are all very, very dangerous things. To me, they all work hand in hand with the global depopulation effort. But more importantly, we as community, as local citizens, can stand up, as per the examples of Mike and Jared up there in South Dakota, and lead a statewide push back. This is how it has to start. We have to start locally. We have to stand up. We have to rally with our neighbors and push back against this. And that's been a very difficult thing. Up in that area, for whatever reason, God bless them, they were able to get enough people to rally to the cause. Most of the country seems content with their nose in the TV and not paying attention to what's creeping up behind them. But at least there is an example, such as the guys up in South Dakota, that have been able to at least thwart this particular issue. And it's only one of the many that we've talked about. But it takes all of us to get involved to really push back on this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, last one I want to talk about here is critical minerals. Now, this is a very interesting conversation because the state that I'm going to bring up is North Carolina. And as many of you remember, when Hurricane Helene happened, there was a lot of speculation. We talked about it here on the show. There was a lot of conspiracy floating around that perhaps this happened because of the rare earth minerals found in the area that Hurricane Helene impacted. So I have some notes here. I'm just going to read them as they are because I don't want to miss anything. This is important. So the eminent domain mineral rights talk after Helene was largely framed as a conspiracy theory when it all first happened. But in April, just a month ago, everything kind of shifted there. A new USGS scientific paper published, as I said, just April, just a month ago, confirmed that the Southern Appalachians hold an estimated 1.43 million metric tons of lithium oxide concentrated in the Carolinas. Now, these were numbers that had been speculated previously, but because of all of the landslides that happened during the hurricane, they now had easier access to test large amounts of land and were able to get a better reading, which is a lot. In May of this year, so just a couple weeks ago, I think it was like the first week of May, the Kings Mountain lithium mine in North Carolina, operating under a $90 million Department of Defense contract, gained clearance to reopen. This was put on hold in like the fall of 2023. And a little less than a year later, Hurricane Helene happened. Now, because of who knows what, they've been able to reopen. But more importantly, the new USGS assessment identified that the massive concentration of lithium-rich pegmatite stretches far beyond those old mines, much of it being located in the very areas of Western North Carolina that were devastated by Hurricane Helene. So this is something that was speculated about, but within the last couple weeks, we found out for sure that that was real. And the mine is reopening, which we can only assume right now that that means it will expand because their contract to mine for that lithium is already with the US government. That was in place before the hurricane took place. Then that mine got basically shut down. Now the mine gets reopened, and simultaneously we find out there's more lithium than we thought. So this one opens up a huge can of worms because it tells us that the ideas that we had about something going on there that was very, very wrong, that were also tied to things like cloud seeding, will eventually come around to lead to people losing their land, to eminent domain, or worse, a natural disaster that you can't get out from under that was potentially manipulated because of something under your land. So this one is so crazy because we thought that this was real. We said it probably was, and now it is real. And people need to be thinking about this. And I don't think people want to talk about this. This is very new information, and I haven't heard a single person talk about it. But it's huge. This is huge news because this is the type of thing that tells us for sure they'll come after each and every one of us, and they will do it by any means necessary. Any means necessary. The last thing I want to add on this one is also in April of this year, in this lithium assessment that was done by the USGS, 900,000 metric tons concentrated in Maine and New Hampshire were identified. So that means that what happened in North Carolina could be coming here in a 1,000 different ways. They could just come knock on our door and say, hey, eminent domain. And maybe if not enough people get on board with it, we'll have a hurricane too. Something worth considering.
Yeah, that's immediately where my mind was going when you were describing what we had talked about back right after Hurricane Helene and how it was a phenomenon. It was an unheard of event where a hurricane became stationary over a certain piece of ground, and it maintained hurricane strength well inland, which are both phenomenons that are not within natural cycles. And oddly enough, now we're finding out that all of these minerals that are needed to build batteries, we're talking about going to battery powered. Many of the things the U.S. military needs are run with these sorts of things. How about all the electric vehicles? How about all the batteries for all of the other electronic devices, etc.? And now we have evidence that this storm, that oddly enough had very many peculiarities with it to begin with, is right over the largest deposit of the very minerals they need to supply the U.S. military and all the big corporations that are involved with cramming the green energy deal down our throat. This is the kind of thing that folks really need to recognize is not just happenstance. These are not just, this just worked out very wonderfully because we have a shortage of this and now we found it. Meanwhile, lots of people died up there. Many, many people lost their homes and lost their livelihoods and moved out of the area. And now we just happen to recognize that there's all these minerals that we need. These are not coincidences. This is the whole point. And weather manipulation was the exact topic you were talking about only moments ago, and it ties in specifically to this very story that, as you mentioned, was just broke last month, as if our attention span can't go back to the fall of 2 years ago, recognizing that storm. We're just supposed to gobble up the 24-hour news loop and forget what happened 2 years ago. And we talked about it, as you mentioned, back then. And as you also alluded to, with other deposits being found up in New England, guess what? They will come up with anything to access this if this is a need of the elites, the global elites. These are the ones that send our children off to fight unnecessary wars. These are the ones that steal from us every paycheck. These are the ones that take our land and put up data centers and put up carbon sequestering. They sell us this bullshit is absolute nonsense. And we sit here like a herd of sheep tolerating it. We get what we tolerate, folks. And until we're done tolerating it, this oppression is only going to continue.
Yeah. Yeah, and get this. There was an executive order for that too, around the same time as the other ones.
Of course.
There was an executive order to increase American mineral production. And if that doesn't tell you that Trump is bought out by the Agenda 2030 crowd, I don't know what does. This whole conversation tonight was about the amount of land and resources that are being stolen from the American people and used for, we can only speculate, I suppose, right? We won't go down that track right now. They're not being used for us. It's not our land anymore. It's not our resources anymore. They're being taken away from us, probably mostly in the name of climate change, if we look through the list. But there were executive orders signed on most of these things when Trump got into office the second time. And that tells me without a doubt that our speculation that Trump was put in there this time to rally up the American people behind him, get us fired up, just for him to go and kiss the same wall and bow at the feet of the same people that are behind all of these other initiatives and agendas. I mean, this gives us the exact proof that we need that is what happened. That is what's happening. And I don't share these ideas to tell people there's no hope. I said early on, I do think there is hope. I do. I just think that by the time we have gathered together as a people, there won't be any land that belongs to us left. By the time 2030 rolls around, which is 3.5 years away, I don't know how much land will belong to the American people, which is our birthright. And that is something that should be on the forefront of our minds as we think about all of these conversations. There's so many things to consider, but ultimately we know with all the problems that are going on in the world, they're all a means to the same end. And that's really what's going on here. You know, Agenda 2030 is kind of one big piece to ultimate puzzle, I think, when we think about the shadow elite, the global cabal. But this is the way that we frame it, Agenda 2030, in a way that we, can sell it to the people that looks nice and pretty. And some of the initiatives that are in Agenda 2030 before, which I've spoken of, but they're relevant to this conversation, affordable and clean energy. Sounds nice, but look at how it's being used here. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Sounds nice. Look at how it's being used here. Climate action. I don't think objectively that one sounds nice. Some people would say that it does, but again, look at how it's being used here. None of this is for the benefit of us. And going back to the point that you made a little bit ago that I kind of wanted to wrap up with is I think that you are 100% right that all of this is about forcing people into cities. Maybe not necessarily 15-minute cities, but if we are in smaller pockets, we are easier to control. We are easier to keep eyes on. There's flock cameras set up all over this country in cities. Oh. They need those things to keep tabs on us. The data centers will collect the data from the flock cameras, which is collecting all of our everything we do, everything we think, everything we say. So it will be a lot easier to collect all of that information in these enormous data centers if we are in small pockets and not so spread out. How do we do that? We take all the rural land away. We make it so you have nowhere to go.
Yeah. This is a topic you could go on and on about. I mean, because it's such a spider web of other that are all connected together, other issues that are all connected together. But before we do close out tonight, I want to point out what I'm going to consider to be a highlight that come out of a bad event, and that was the fact that Thomas Massie got rooted out after a lot of foreign money poured into the campaign against him at the behest of Donald Trump. But one of the things, when you look at the demographic and how that voting broke down, the MAGA supporters, and that is mainly 65 years and up, are solidly with Trump and not with Massie. As you go down the scale toward the younger group, the percentage that was with Massie goes up and up and up. So it may not happen in my time, but there is certainly a shift where the younger people are recognizing the threat that government is to us, to our land, to our ability to live free. And they are saying no. They are in support of Thomas Massie. By the time you take the 18 to 29-year-old group, I think it was 73 or 78% were solidly in favor. The only demographic that was in favor of the Israeli through Trump installed candidate was 65 plus. So the younger people are waking up. The older folks, as we've talked many times, are still a little bit numb. They don't quite have the comfort going to alternative sources for information. They're still locked in on the traditional, getting the propaganda dumped into their head. Rah, 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 MAGA. So the whole MAGA concept is breaking into America First and MAGA. You know, the Tucker Carlsons, Candace Owens, all of these folks, Owen Shores, they've all been shoved to the side. And the Sean Hannity and the Mark Levin and the other mouthpieces for the Israeli agenda have still captured that older group. But there is signs of life, in particular, coming from the younger generation. And the most highly committed to making significant change is the youngest, 18 to 29. Then the next group, and as you get closer to the 65, those percentages start to diminish and flip-flop. So the good bit of news is young people are waking up to this. I've kind of given up on the older folks, my generation and older. I think they have just been so duped, so brainwashed that most of them find it incapable of changing their thought patterns.
Yeah. That's probably true. I mean, definitely it is good news. I just wonder how much it will mean if we have no land left to live on and provide for ourselves. But yeah, I mean, there certainly is a change happening. But, you know, the people who are feeling these changes, they have to be able to stand up about this stuff because we're facing real threats. And it's not just in Washington, D.C. It's at our homes. So that is something that we should be able to rally behind. And I I just pray that we do. I pray that we can see the way that these things connect with one another and what it really means on a big scale for this country. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it from me tonight. I know we kind of were all over the place. We had some technical difficulties, but I think we touched on everything I wanted to.
Well, it ended up being quite a bit longer. I thought it was going to be a short one, but we got rolling there. So you had a lot of good material. You had a lot of good topics. It certainly was material that is worth going over and continuing to repeat.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we will plan an episode with Jared and Mike again soon, too, so that we can get updates on what's going out their way. Because, as always, they've served as a great inspiration for how to take a stand against this stuff. Because we all need an example for what we can do when it does come to our area.
100%. Okay, Bible verse for tonight.
All right.
Unfortunately, I didn't write down where it came from, but I do have the verse, and it goes, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And I'm sorry, I neglected to write down exactly where that came from. Sounds like a New Testament thing, but anyway, that's the Bible verse for tonight.
I found it quickly for you. That is Mark 10:45.
Perfect. Thanks for covering me on that.
My pleasure. All right, everybody. We gave you lots of stuff to think about tonight. We'll share some stuff in the show notes. Remember to go to trackdatacenters.com. Lots of stuff to research on your own time here. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pike. So pay attention, get involved, get educated, and as always, stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.